Hi, I'm the True Gamer, giving off my vast knowledge so you may understand games a bit better. For those who don't know, the PS2 is one of my favorite consoles of all time. Mostly due to just the pure whiff of experience you can just see on this console. You want an RPG? Bam! More than covered. You want an action beat-em-up game? We got you, bruh. You want a rhythm game? We got you covered. You want a platformer? We have them in spades. You want a lot, and I do mean a lot of visual novels? Boy, do we got you covered. There are so many games on this console that you could be playing the PS2 for the rest of your life and still be entertained. So when a game just says, this is a love letter to the PS2 generation, you have my full attention. However, while playing it, I felt that I was more remembering the PS3 generation rather than the PS2 generation. This game is an oddity to this day that we aren't sure about anything mostly behind the scenes other than the comments I saw on Jacob's video and things I found on the Discord. Which, yeah, is actually a thing. Which, to go back onto Jacob Geller's video, while I think it's a well-presented and very interesting video, I think it's far more charitable to a game than I would ever be to anything. Throughout this video, I'm going to take a very more negative view on the game for really one simple reason. Like, I have a lot of reasons to be negative, but the one that made me say, yeah, no, was its price point of $60 on release. $60 for this game, and this was before the big price gouging. And let me be clear on this game is not worth $60. The game has dropped to the more reasonable $30, and even then I'm still dubious, but that's a whole other thing. Really, I didn't even buy it. I got it through Humble Bundle, and that was like $15, and that was mostly so I can get Eastward, a game that I was always wanting to try, but never could until then. And I got this game as a part of that bundle, and I said to myself, why not? See what was the whole hubbubaloo about. And after one fight, Hedgehog dies and broke. And sadly was not recording, even though I should have. Real dumb move on my end. But after that moment, I knew I had to talk about this game. So let's actually begin by talking about the developer of this game. That being Soleil. I think that's how it's pronounced, but who cares? Who are really not well known. Mostly a newer company that didn't get more notice until they were merged with Valhalla Games, who we will need to mention in a bit. They've only made a few amount of games that I've ever known. They made that Shinobi Striker game that I've heard of, but really can't remember. The actually decent Samurai Jack game that has a better ending than the actual show, Fight Me. And that one Valkyrie profile game that exists, I guess. Not bad games from what I've heard, but not a lot of stellar stuff to make you go, wow, I should see what comes next from these guys. So they decided to make their next big game, and it's interesting to say the least. I have honestly not much to say about this game because this game is just shrouded in mystery in general. A type of mystery that beggars belief, and really, really made me think about this game. While we talk about this game, I really want you to do me a favor and keep 4 games in mind. Those 4 games being El Shaddai, Killer is Dead, 10,000 Bullets, and finally, Final Fantasy XIII. Cause yes, seriously, all of them will be mentioned in this review of Wanted Dead. We begin in a jail cell as we meet our protagonist, Hannah Stone, who is being offered a job to do something, and she wholeheartedly agrees to it, even if it's morally dubious. We then cut to the year 2022. Yeah, this is actually important, and I'm mentioning the year because it's actually super important later, too important. In any case, we are in a 60s styles restaurant as they're waiting for their food. And to side note about something that's always bugged me, you know that one critique that Star Wars got in episode 2 where basically everyone said, hey, ain't it weird that this type of restaurant's in this movie in the future? Is it though? I know a few places that are still designed this way today, like Freddy Shake and Shack. I can't even remember its name. Five Guys or some other place. My point is, this style is still a thing. Norma's. Really nice place. Has some great pies, by the way. Plus, the style's fine. It's not bad or anything. People do like this style, so what's the problem? Plus, the game's going for a future retroism. So what's even more the problem? Look, I was never gonna mention the prequel stuff much, so I thought I could talk about it here. Full honesty. But back on track, after having their meal, they are told to buckle up and prepare for a mission. You'll probably notice I haven't actually really explained anything, really. That's mostly because the game just doesn't want to explain anything. Which is admirable at times because sometimes you just want the player to just get into the action. Problem here, it's not doing that. We won't be able to hit that until the 10-minute mark. So since the game won't explain it to you normally, I will. We are in control of the Zombie Unit, a police unit in Future City, Hong Kong, using war criminals after World War X. Wait, what? What do you mean you don't know that last part? That's because it's literally not in the game. Let me explain. Well, I'm sort of lying. There was an intro to the game that I guess, and is a bit confusing because it's not very clear on certain aspects. And really, I don't think an intro should be like, not in the intro. And to be clear, when I say the intro, I mean that opening movie that plays when you don't touch anything for a bit in the menu. That's it. Not like the actual in-game intro. But you want to know what's actually pretty funny about it all? That doesn't really matter to the plot, at all. It's never referenced anywhere, it's not pointed out, or not even actually referenced anywhere else. It is only mentioned, sort of in the intro, and on the Discord. Which, yes, is alive. Somehow. Actually, to side note for a moment, while I seem like I have a very hearty disdain for the Discord, that's not true at all. In fact, they were pretty nice to me and were willing to answer some of my questions. Hell, I actually got some questions answered by the creative director, and they said something to me that just made me question everything. But we'll get into that sort of stuff after we talk about the gameplay because, well, this is where I'm gonna have to bring up the games I referenced earlier. The first one being El Shaddai. Now, most of you are like, the hell is El Shaddai? Well, for the record, it was a PS3/Xbox game that was really, really unknown. Most people don't even remember it. The fact that this game is even known by anyone is a miracle in and of itself. I mean, it recently got a remaster. Yeah, I'm not joking. It got one a little while ago. We're still surprised it happened. It technically got a sequel. Yeah, I'm not joking on it. If you technically count it, I count it. And now you're like, okay, whatever. Why is it important? Well, here's the problem with El Shaddai. El Shaddai is super basic. You can look at it and say, that's it. And wipe your hands clean. I can't even joke to you about this. The game is really bare bones, but in the weirdest way possible. So let's actually begin talking about it. The gameplay is actually a bit of an odd beast in and of itself. As much as I said it's like El Shaddai, it's also like Devil's Third. Because some of the developers of this game were from Valhalla Games, who worked on Devil's Third. Really, this game can actually be described as Devil's Third done again. In fact, I actually did not know this while I was actually playing it until I decided to look it up more. And I was always like, wow, this game is really like Devil's Third. Without knowing that last part, I seriously could not have known. But let's actually elaborate on that gameplay. The gameplay is split off into two sections. Well, I say sections, but it's more like they try to balance this. Let me elaborate. Basically, you can switch between using a gun or a sword whenever you want. Which, let me tell you, both of them are not good. let's start talking about the shooting aspect, and let me just tell you right now, it's bad. Like, I'm not into shooters, but I can enjoy them. It's just my bar is a little different than most people. But even then, even on a cursory glance, I can look to this game and say, yeah, the shooting's all bad. That's mostly because both sides want to be decent, but they lack the things that make them well enjoyable in my mind. See, guns work weirdly in this game. You are trained on how to use them, but really when you get down to it, they aren't really meant for combat. Yeah, the game has a hard time of actually incentivizing gunplay. In fact, the recent update tried to alleviate that issue, but really it didn't really fix anything. Because basically it made the game easier in general. Like, for the record, I played the game on normal on my first playthrough, and for my updated playthrough, I did it on hard. And I couldn't tell a difference because the update really did decrease the difficulty so much that there really isn't a difference anymore. But back on gunplay. The most problematic part about it is that it's alone for the most part. Like, sure, I can pull out my gun and shoot someone a bit after a few attacks, but why not just keep attacking? Maybe if they're guarding, but why not just keep attacking and prepare for a parry now because, well, they deal a lot of damage and leave the enemies open anyway, so why not? Plus, the update made it so that the parry window was extended. So again, there's no reason to use guns. Plus, it's not helped when enemies have armor. Yeah, let me elaborate on this more. You see, in the game, enemies have armor. Like, let's actually go into another aspect. Gun customization. Hannah has two guns. Those being her handgun and her assault rifle. Still confused on why it's not a hand cannon, but whatever. I'm just saying it would have worked more mechanically speaking, but whatever. And throughout the game, you can gain customization parts. Basically switch out parts to increase certain stats. Throughout most of the game, and most people whose reviews I watched or saw, they were all like, yeah, I have no idea what these stats do. As in, they don't think they actually do anything and are just there to look cool. When they actually do exist and actually have a function. Like armor piercing. Because the game gives all enemies a bit of armor. So basically, every time you shoot at an enemy, you'll notice sometimes they're not shooting out blood at first, then they will. That's the armor system. And I'm very confused on why the game doesn't even mention that. In fact, I'm more confused on why the enemies don't have a health bar in general. Because let me tell ya, these enemies are tanks. Like, you could probably take down a few gun enemies with your ammo, but you can only ever do that so much before you run out. And all the other enemies? Don't even bother, they'll take too much of your ammo away anyway. So why even bother? And again, before somebody mentions it, well, it's not meant to be the main focus. It's supposed to be a side thing while you're doing melee. Well, here's the problem. The tutorial taught me to say, this is gunplay. This is melee. They don't work right. The game doesn't really incentivize it as much as people think it does. Basically, when I saw these two things, instead of trying to blend them together, I saw them as two different aspects of combat that just aren't enjoyable on their own. Let's actually talk about melee for a moment, because my other issue is just melee's too basic. You have 3 string combos and that's it. There are others, but you don't care about them. In fact, I don't even think the game tells you how to even use those. I'm still not sure. There's even a charge attack that I literally forgot was in the game because why the fuck would you just stand around taking a hit when you could just slide in and just hit them? The game has this weird problem where it just expects you to try mixing it up, when mixing it up doesn't really make it more effective. Cause really, melee seems like the better option because it deals the most damage, and the game just can't handle that you can just melee the whole game. And yeah, I did that throughout the entire game. I only used guns, when they were required, but that's it. Like, my first playthrough is where I try to mix gunplay, but it never felt right. And on my second playthrough, I ignored it like the plague, and let me tell you, it still feels the same. And that's because of that update I referenced earlier. The update basically made hard normal. And it's like, why? Basically, the whole difficulty of the game has been so skewed, now it's basically too easy. And I mean, like, if you want to know why melee was so easy for me, it's mostly this. The AI can't handle you just meleeing. It expects you to at least try to mix it up. Because when you go guns a-blazing, ironically, you don't use your guns, the game can't handle you because you're going out of its way where basically the enemies have to kind of maneuver itself in such a way where basically it has to kind of like hide behind cover. Problem is, the AI ain't smart here. Like, I could just tell you straight up, the AI here is dumb. Sometimes it will not react to you in any meaningful manner. And the AI is also stupid. Your AI team members, you can gain abilities to let them actually do something, but that's out of spite of themselves because most times than not, they're doing this shit. And I cannot stress to you how much this worked. Because most times than not, when you're dealing with multiple gun enemies, they can't really react to you because you're too close to them and they have to reorientate themselves. And even if they start shooting at you, well, there's another mechanic in the game where basically if you hit them fast enough, you regain a bit of your health. And that's enough usually to keep you going until the next checkpoint, which are plentiful. And like, the only times you'll actually have a problem is when you're dealing with the ninjas and the brutes. Let's quickly talk about the brutes. The brutes are basically heavy machine gun enemies that once you get close enough to them, they'll start meleeing, but once that happens, you're pretty much won if you know how to parry right, which, because of, again, that parry window's been extended because of the update, basically makes them too easy. And the ninja enemies are annoying. Basically, they work like normal melee enemies, but they have more combo strings, and thus, if you want to block them and parry them properly, you need to do it very carefully and do it multiple times in a row, even though their combo consistency is all over the place. And I want to also just note something that just popped into my head because I just realized this. There are only like 4 enemies in the entire game. You have your gun enemies, your weak melee enemies, your ninja, and your brutes. That's it. That is the entire game. So the pool of enemies also makes it begin to become quite boring early on, and really has no room to improve because the game is what you get. It basically shows everything it can show to you really early on. And then the game becomes this flat experience where you're just waiting around to do something when nothing will change. The only real difference that happens are bosses, and 2 of them are just repeats. 1 of them is just boring and just there. 1 of them is just poorly programmed because I'm still not sure how the hell you're supposed to fight him. And the final boss, it's just a parry thing, and it's like, ugh. And that's why it led me to be reminded of El Shaddai. El Shaddai is only interesting in some capacity by its gameplay, but it becomes a very flat experience. You do it because the game tells you to do it, and not because it's actually interesting on its own. And before somebody tells me, oh, what about the hidden deaths about this game? And it's like, who cares? You're doing just the same thing over and over again, and it's just like, why even bother? And really, the only thing that makes it interesting are all the takedown attacks, which can be done by either certain times where the enemies are open, like in this section, or if you activate your adrenaline meter and just basically shoot some enemies that will put them in the takedown animation. And really, that's all there is to it. Like, I'm not leaving anything out. There is bullet time, but I never used it once because it didn't really need it. I think the update adds some stuff to the mechanics a bit, but I couldn't care. The game's too simple already that it's like, why bother learning that? And it's not like it's bad, it's just banal. Like, if you played an action game, it's fine. Like, it's not gonna wow you or anything, but it's serviceable. It feels like a good base for a more complex game, but there isn't one. I just felt like I was waiting for the rest of the game, and it never did. And ironically, I could say that about the story as well. And oh boy, do I have a lot of things to say about the story, cause, for the record, I have tried so many times trying to figure out the best way to talk about this game. And for me, internally, it's basically go more free form. Basically, anytime I wrote it down, it never sounded right, so I'm kind of going spur in the moment what's going on in my head. So, if it sounds a little messy, I apologize, but it was the best way to talk about it. If I want to be technical and be real here, my bigger issue is more about the perception about the game and how it's being perpetuated. By that I mean there is an idea in a lot of the game discussion, and that being this game is bad on purpose. It basically goes, they point to the story and how nonsensical it is and basically say, yeah, it's bad on purpose. Because there's no possible way a creator could just make this story and be like, wow, this is good enough to sell. I mean, like, I could point to Final Fantasy 13, but we could talk about that some other day. Oh god, I'm still never finishing it. But I can only hope that you got the point. Sometimes the writers do make something bad, but this one feels like it's unintentionally. Because throughout the entire game, the game will introduce weird concepts for a moment, but then will completely ignore them just to move forward, even though it feels like it will reference them back soon enough, even if it's not immediate. Like, remember that one woman from that one cutscene who was an insurance agent and was there to kind of like hand the bill to the department? And like how they introduced her, gave her a name and stuff, and like, they kind of play it out that they'll meet again. But after this scene, you will never see her again, and she will not matter into the plot in any matter at all. And more times than not, a lot of times throughout my review, when I was originally playing it, I thought the story was more scattershot than unfinished, which I still hold as an idea, but I don't know, the idea of it being more unfinished feels more tangible, for lack of a better term. It basically just felt like there was enough there for me to say that's the probable answer, rather than the writing just being this bad. Because why waste your time on this scene? What could you possibly gain by using this scene? Like, what did this scene serve in any sort of narrative sense? You can extrapolate the idea that her life is kind of shit. She doesn't really have a life outside of her work, meaning she's pretty much bored out of her mind. But no, earlier scenes and later scenes disprove that. Is her life bad? Not really, as the game tells us. Is the scene supposed to show us that she feels a disconnect from her team, who are basically all over there, and like, why are they sitting separately? The game doesn't really have an idea of why certain scenes exist, and just has them existing without any real reason. And I'm not just talking about in the narrative sense, I'm talking in a thematic sense. Oh yeah, baby, we're going thematic on this. Because artistically, I am left wondering, what is your point? Are you trying to do a Dadaist sort of style of art? If you don't know what that is, look it up. It's actually an interesting form. It's just every time I look at this thing, I'm just wondering what was even the point. Like, artistically speaking, what are you trying to say? What is there to say in your work? And I felt as though I was left with nothing. And that's mostly also because the narrative is just poorly written as well. Like, spoiler alert for a... Oh wow, this game's only 2 years old. Shit. Wait, it's even less than that. Oh god. In any case, let's do a simple rundown on the plot. As I mentioned earlier, I don't need to mention that stuff. Basically, during your adventures, you find a group of synthetic people revolting. Oh, there are synthetic people? Keep up with the plot, people. It was only mentioned like at the beginning once. Ya knob. That are revolting because bad treatment. Like, it's synthetic story number 1222556. You capture one, they say you're the real cyborg. Dun dun dun, doesn't amount to anything. And while trying to find out what the heck is going on, you find out that this guy has something to do with it, but then you kill him and just left wondering what the hell that mattered. But then this guy comes in and says you're all under arrest, and basically says, nah, they leave, try to escape, using the synthetic people to kind of find a way to hide out for a little bit. Hannah tries to stay and defeat this guy, who's actually the leader of this group, maybe, who knows, who cares, game ends. That is the simplified version of the plot. And you might be wondering, why did I leave those out? I'll get to that at the end, because, oh boy, again, once I tell you this, it's really gonna be fucking annoying. Like, for all intents and purposes, I really didn't leave anything out. I just told you what happened. There's really nothing beyond that. And weirdly enough, the game has the opposite problem of what I have a lot of problems with other games. Like, this is something weird that I brought up at once, but I'll try to elaborate. See, I usually like it when a story kind of brings up a weird factoid about a character, and it plays no factor into the plot, but it's there. This game, for whatever reason, has a lot of mostly over there things to learn about the characters. And that's neat, but problem is you never really learn anything about them. Like, sure, you can learn that Hexog has a real love of ramen, but what else? Like, who is he? Why is he in prison? Why is he here? Or Cortez, who really likes this one space shooter game. Okay. Why is he mute? The game doesn't seem to want to answer really anything about the characters, just have them there and be there. It's the difference between knowing something about the character and knowing a fun fact about a character. Like, one fact is important to the plot, and the other is there for flavor. It's like a meal. Like, the facts you learn about a character is the meal, and the fun facts are like the seasoning. You know what I mean? It adds something to them without really taking away from the main facts about the character. I'm like trying to elaborate on this, but I'm sorry. But there lies my bigger problem. The game just doesn't really have anything really interesting about its characters. It has funny moments, but not moments. Like, outside of those fun facts, could you actually tell me anything about Hexog outside of those things? I honestly couldn't, and I read the dossiers, which, oh, yeah, right. I don't count that. I don't let Final Fantasy 13 have that shit. What the fuck makes you think I'm gonna let this game do it? Seriously, why in the everlasting hell do writers keep doing this? That sort of stuff is for optional stuff. Put optional, fun tidbits. That's what you're supposed to put there. Not just the actual facts about the character. And honestly, it led me to a bigger problem of, why should I even care about these guys? They're all monsters, for lack of a better term. They've pretty much done horrific things that can be qualified as war crimes. You know, stuff people should not do. I'm just trying to find reasons why I should care about these characters in the plot, but the game just doesn't want to do that. And I kind of want to mention those side things for a moment. You know, like the ramen minigame, the space shooter one, and the karaoke, because, oh boy, I got something to say that always pissed me off. Like, you do know all the side activities are there to flesh out the world? They're not just there to be fun gimmicks, which, I mean, some of them are, but, you know, they're not just solely there for that. Because when I look at Wanted Dead side things, they're basically there not because of any real story reason. They're there because they are there. But in Yakuza, there's usually a little story behind it. There's maybe some minor character here that we might like. I mean, like, there's a reason why Pocket Circuit Fighter became really popular. It's because there's a character there we can enjoy and have fun with. It's a character who has its own set of life. And we enjoy that. To really wrap this up, I kind of want to talk about the karaoke. Really, what annoys me about the karaoke is that, again, it's brought up with Yakuza reference, but the thing is, when Yakuza does it, it actually has an actual thematical reason for doing so. Like, Wanted Dead just brings it up out of nowhere. Like, there's nothing about it. It's not built up or anything, it's just something you do. While in Yakuza 0, it actually has a thematical point because it's more of an overarching thematical point. Because Judgment is about the themes of, like, how we must stick together, we must stand together. Even if the world's against us, we'll break it in two. And it's thematically tied to Nishiki, who's a bit more sheepish, but wants to help his brother out. So they'll break the world, break the rule, keep each other in check, making sure that they'll go to the top. And when I think about that, it makes the song so much better. It sticks with you, not only because it's a good song, it sticks with you on a thematical level. It at least can stick to you on that. Here, I honestly don't know why. Like, I can get the idea on why they chose 99 Loose Balloons, because of what it meant is it's an anti-war song. But, you know, it just seems there. Because the game isn't really anti-war or anything. It doesn't really feel like it's about anything in particular. And therein lies my bigger problem. It never felt connected. It never felt like it was trying to do something. It just felt like it was just spinning its wheels until the end. That's all it ever felt like. And let me tell ya, once I realized that, it dragged on me. And I just couldn't care about anything about what's going on anymore. There were things that were interesting, like that one cutscene that happens when you pick up this one file. Again, it kind of bleed into my thoughts of, yeah, probably this thing was meant to be like somewhere in the main plot, but they forgot to actually implement it and just left it there. Because, out of context, this is a very solid scene in some regard. Like, I want to talk about this for a moment. The cinematography's fine, it's just, you know, is not really interesting in and of itself. And let me tell you, it's not helped because of the bad fucking dialogue. Seriously, I still to this day don't know if that voice acting was made bad on purpose or not, but at this point, it doesn't really matter. In fact, if anything, if that voice acting's bad on purpose, no, you get 0 points out of me. Why the hell some people defend this is beyond me. We are past the point of any bad dialogue, unless you're a modder. That's your only defense. If you're doing this out of the time of your life, and this is some side thing you're doing, whatever. But this is a professional product that people had to pay $60 to get. I don't know. Again, I repeat this like I said earlier. Your price point changes how I view your game in general. Trying to stay in line with the genre, something like Assault Spy, it's like $30 though, that went up in price, but it was at least early access, and, well, it's still fine. It's a fine game for what it's trying to do, and the price point it asks. But this game, released at $60, and was buggy on release. I've had to ask a few friends of mine, but yes, it was very buggy on release. And yet, this game thinks it's worth $60. Now, I'll say it like I said in my Gungrave review. We have reached a quality threshold now that you need to meet. Stop using the past as a way to excuse your bad quality. You know better. Stop it. And now, I want to bring up my last example. I referenced a game called 10,000 Bullets. 10,000 Bullets was a game that never released in America and was only released in Europe and Japan. overall, I like the game, though I think the game has problems that could have been more refined. But to me, it also represents that era as well, where while it did stumble in a lot of places, it had an original idea that was interesting and was worth trying. And when it works, it works. It's actually pretty enjoyable. Like, if I can recommend a game here, go play that and Assault Spy. A Midnight Fight Express is also pretty good, like if I could recommend some games right here, because might as well. But my point is this. When I saw that love letter to the PS2 era, I didn't see it. Nothing about this game screams PS2. It reminds me of the PS3 era. A game that cares more about its aesthetics more than anything else. Not how it actually feels, like, not just in a gameplay sense, though that is a thing that feels like a problem here. But I mean in that general vibe. It feels like more like a PS3 game that finally got pushed out to the other places and barely got enough money for a dub. That's it. And like, I can't stress this enough. This dub is bad. It actively hurts some scenes that it's trying to do, making it hard to actually engage with it. But I've been rambling on, and I've been kind of forestalling myself from actually talking about the thing I really want to talk about. That being the ending cutscene. So, let's be clear about this. Out of every cutscene in this game, I think this one is the literal best handled cutscene in the entire game. It's just a really, really nice scene. Like, without the context of anything around it, it's a pretty nice scene. However, sadly, when you start adding context to the scene starts making less and less sense. This has nothing to do with anything I'm about to talk about, but it was something weird that I noticed, but none of the other people ever mention. Okay, so weirdly enough, nobody talks about this, but the cutscene takes place 3 months later. I know, like, that's like a weird thing to mention, but I think it's weird that I needed to mention that, but whatever. So, what's the problem? Like, what's the issue? Okay, we need to talk about those anime cutscenes now, and actually explain what's the deal with that. So, Hannah Stone is actually named Emma something. I literally cannot remember the name right now, and I don't think I could be able to pronounce it properly anyway. So I'm just gonna call Anime Stone Emma, for the record. So essentially, Emma had a wild side. Enough to have a child at 15. Like, if anything I can give praise to this game, you know what? They did something like that. If anything, I'm surprised they let this through, but you know what? Whatever. I'm just saying they had the balls to do that, so hey, that's something too. But let me elaborate more. Emma kept the child, and with the help of her mother, they basically tried to raise the child. But the child was also having health issues. However, due to the medical system, basically, nope, you're fucked. Because the medicine to keep him alive would be too expensive. Seriously, if I could say anything right now, a good health system should not be privatized. Like, anyone who tells you otherwise are monsters. Just tell them to their faces. They're monsters. I know, sidetracking for a moment, but you know what? I don't care. They're monsters. They want people to die. Anyway, the doctor then tells her there is a way to make the money. Basically, she would sell her life, in a matter of speaking. Basically giving up a year of her life away to do something. Most people assume that that led her into this new life, but the details aren't very clear. But the one aspect about this cutscene that everyone kind of misunderstood, even I did, and I make no delusion that I would have never had realized this until someone pointed it out to me. And ironically, that was the creative director. Yeah, the creative director was in the Discord and actually answered my question. Though it was actually entirely unrelated to it. Because one of the things I had a problem with was that, are we sure that these two people are the same? Like, personality speaking, they don't seem similar, or really anywhere near related. Sure, this voiced by the same actor, but that doesn't prove anything. But basically, the creative director said, yes, they are the same person, but personality-wise, they're totally different. There are two different lives at this point. But the creative director also mentioned that this was a life that Hannah wouldn't remember. And then that thing kind of spiraled out from this. Okay, who the hell is she calling then? Like, you would have just assumed it's her son, right? Well, here's the problem. Like I mentioned, Hannah doesn't remember her old life. So how the hell would she know who her son is? Or even that she had a son? I mean, like, sure, there's a few month time disparity, so maybe she remembered everything, but my other problem is this. Why would Hannah care? Throughout the entire game, she doesn't really give much of a what about these memories in any real sense. Because usually the plot will then just move on and pretend they didn't happen. They'll be ignored and not really thought about much at all. And it's really weird, like, why wouldn't you want to focus on these when they are by far the most interesting aspect? Because they basically create this ironically interesting way of handling it by basically creating a different style for it. Remember how I said, like, thematically speaking, like, I was at a loss? Like, here I can actually get something. By creating this style, it basically allows for a disconnect. Basically, this is a life that she formerly had, but no longer feels real to her anymore. Which I find super interesting. It's just too bad the game doesn't really emphasize it. And, like, I don't know, like, it feels so weird that Hannah wouldn't really want to think about her old life. In fact, like I keep stating, we don't really learn much about Hannah that much, or any of the characters. And I'm just wondering why not. But let's get back to the cutscene. There are other aspects about this scene that we need to talk about too, because there are other problems. Because you see, I noticed something on my first go around that was always in my mind. You see, in the anime flashback, there was a little thing on the corner of everything, and I noticed the number 2004. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, why is that a big deal to you? Well, it's because I then wanted to look back on everything and kind of like check out the info. Because really, it's more of a sort of problem, more of a thing you notice in hindsight when you actually go out of your way to look for it. Because here's the problem. Let's actually elaborate on the cutscene a little more, because I actually haven't really explained it. Essentially, the cutscene is Hannah talking on the phone, trying to talk to someone on the other side. But she's being denied until she's finally able to talk to someone, and she's having an emotional moment. Again, I want to repeat, out of context, this scene's really good. However, the more you look into this game, the less it makes sense. For example, the person on the other side mentions the donations she gives. This has never been addressed or stated in the game. It's mentioned offhandedly in one of the documents, but again, go screw yourself. I'm not reading a fucking document to learn about a scene in the goddamn game. We've been over this. Final Fantasy 13 doing that was garbage then, it was garbage now. And it's like, also because of that other thing I mentioned, like, I mentioned 2004. Why is that important? Because you see, if you've been paying attention about all the cutscenes, there's at least a timeline. You can at least have a good idea of when things happen. Hannah had her kid when she was 15. She graduated in 2004. She starts looking for a job around that same time. And then later on, due to shenanigans, lose her memories of her past and lives a whole new life. My bigger issue is usually that, let's even assume that she remembers everything now. Let's just automatically assume that. My issue is, that's not who she's talking to. If she's talking to her son would be at least 22, 21 if we're lucky. So, I don't know about you, but in a cyberpunk dystopian society, I don't know what sort of orphanage would keep kids after 18. It just didn't feel right. Because I don't know, I don't feel like cyberpunk dystopia cares much about children to begin with. I'm just saying. And some people have argued that it's actually this other kid that we talked about a while back. And honestly, it's another well done scene. Again, I feel like how the game is structured is fine. It's just the connecting threads between them are just missing and should have been there. However, that doesn't work either due to because of other timeline stuff. Because you see, that cutscene actually takes place literal only like a few hours before the beginning cutscene of the game. I'm not joking. I mean, you could argue it still is, but a little too much for my blood. And it's like, I'm trying to make this scene make sense. And it's like, I can't. I just can't. At the end of the day, Wanted Dead left me felt wanting. It feels like a game that could have been more. The gameplay is at times fine, could have been better, and could have done more. The story is nonsensical to most people, and when you actually try to look deeper into it, it starts making less and less sense. The music's actually fine. Like, oh crap, I didn't talk about the music. Like, if I could say anything about this game, the music's actually pretty good. Like, solid C+, maybe another half plus, but it's fine. It's serviceable, but it does its job. I do think that one song they made for this game was actually pretty good. She worked hard for that money. Really good song, by the way. Yeah, that's it. Goodbye.